you guys know all about us probably. And if you don't, I'm happy to answer questions after, but I think everyone's really excited to get to the lecture. So today we have Lindsay Watkins. She's a field specialist in forest resources with UNH Cooperative Extension, which most of you are probably very familiar with Cooperative Extension and have used their resources before. So part of what she does is provide education and resources to individuals, communities, and professionals in the stewardship of forests and trees. And she is a licensed forester and a certified arborist, and also, according to her, a professional tree nerd. So I think she'll fit in pretty well here. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay, and then there'll be time for questions as well.
All right. Melissa, should I be using this mic too? Okay.
If you hold the button on the bottom down for a minute, it'll turn on.
There's a lot of technology happening here, which is fine and great.
Back up if this dies. Hello. Is that better than when I was doing the intro? Okay,
that's great. Perfect. Oh yeah, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna troubleshoot the captions just for a second here.
The captions.
You're doing it through PowerPoint, right? Not through Zoom?
Correct. Yes, you're right. I might need to.
I need to like pick someone else.
This is grayed out, I think.
Are you in?
I'm in the presenter view. I'm like wary of closing.
I know. Is it gonna be a big deal for your slide?
I don't think it will.
It's actually off it.
Okay, we're gonna see if the captions come back. There they are, or the subtitles. I will tell you what's on the slide if the subtitle comes up over the text. I've been working really hard at trying to keep my slides less whiny, so we'll see. This will be a good real-time test to see how I have done. All right, now they went away again. Okay, what's okay, I think
I keep saying that they're starting.
it says it's on. It might just take a minute because it says it's listening.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Okay, we're gonna do the best we can. If anybody is having trouble hearing me, I will try to project and I'll talk through the microphone, but I don't know, please feel free to just yell at me or come up and nudge me directly. I apologize. This is a new attempt for me using the subtitle through PowerPoint. Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here on a Wednesday afternoon. This is actually my first time here at the Discovery Center, so most of you probably know this spot a lot better than I do. So as Melissa said, I'm the Stratford County Forester with UNH Cooperative Extension. I've been with Extension for about 2 years and a couple months now. Before that, I was working as a consulting forester and arborist in the Pacific Northwest. But before that, I lived in New Hampshire for about 8 years up in the Jackson, North Conway area. So still feeling newer to this part of the state and getting to know particularly the seacoast and sort of south of Durham a little bit better. Right now, I'm also covering half of Rockingham County for our Rockingham County forester, Greg Jordan, if any of you have worked with him or met him. So if you're on the eastern side of Rockingham County, I'm also your county forester right now. So we're gonna talk about trees today, which it's fun to kick off a lecture series at an estuary and research center by talking about trees, because I am not a marine biologist or estuarian ecologist or any of that, but trees are really important to everything that happens downslope and downstream. So that's my jam and I'll stay in my lane. Feel free to ask any questions at any point. I'll try to keep this kind of informal. I may not move too much because of the video settings and all that, but we'll see how it goes. Great. So what is happening with our big trees? There's a lot going on out there. You probably are kind of constantly hearing about the latest forest insect or disease. They all seem to have these names that get shortened to 2 or 3 initials. So years ago, we were hearing a lot about Asian longhorn beetle, which we're not even going to talk about today very much, other than to say that's a success story, and I can touch on that. You've probably heard a lot about emerald ash borer. You're hearing probably about spotted lanternfly. And then the latest one, which is the one that we're going to start with, because it feels like this is what I talk about just about every day now, is beech leaf disease. So, we've got our ALB, our EAB, our SLF, our BLD with our BBD, and we like to not apparently say words and shorten everything. So we'll launch right into it. As I said, beech leaf disease is kind of the hot topic right now in forest health in New Hampshire. I'd say probably 50% of the questions that I got about like what's happening to my trees last year were beech leaf disease related. How many of you have seen this in your trees? Great. Okay, so a few people still haven't. So this is the latest forest health threat that we're dealing with in New Hampshire. It's a really interesting one because it's not like any of the others. This is the first time we've seen a tree pathogen or pest that is a nematode that lives in the foliage. So nematodes are everywhere. They're very ubiquitous organisms. We have them in us, on us, and all around us. They are commonly problematic in agricultural settings. This is the first time in the US that we've seen a nematode that is really problematic in a tree or forest setting. There's a few others out there, but this one's pretty new to us. So nematodes are small little worm-like creatures. This one in particular is about 1 millimeter, so you can't see it with your naked eye. Picture up there in the top is a couple of them under a microscope. They are able to infect and affect most species of beech, including American beech, which is our common beech species that we see in our forests all around us here in New Hampshire. But they can also affect ornamental beech trees. So copper beech or other variants of European beech, Fagus sylvatica, are commonly planted as landscape trees in, landscape settings and parks and things like that. So they can affect those as well. And this nematode, we first found this in trees in Ohio in 2012. One thing you'll notice is that when we talk about a lot of these pests, bugs, diseases, they are entering the US at various different points, but sort of the Great Lakes region seems to be a bit of a hotbed, which is interesting. But then you think about all the shipping that goes on there through the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes area. So we have a lot of international commerce and trade that's going through that area. And so this one in particular, we don't know exactly where it came from, but it's the working theory. It is thought to be native to Japan, and it is believed that it came to us in soil and bonsai specimens. Beech is a common bonsai tree, and folks like to import a lot of the Japanese bonsai species to work on, and that's probably where it came from. Being less than 1 millimeter long, it would have been hard to know until we saw it starting to show up in our trees. First found in Ohio in 2012, it has sort of rapidly progressed eastward and northward. And it was first found in New Hampshire in 2022, and it's spread pretty rapidly since then. Sorry, still moving a few things around on my screen here. The way this organism works, just a little bit on the life cycle. So the nematode populations, these little guys are crawling around on our leaves in the summer, or in our leaves as it really is. They are reproducing throughout the summer. The population sort of peaks late summer, early fall, and they migrate from inside the leaves into the buds at the end of our branches, and they spend the winter there. So when we see beech leaf disease, which this sort of raised, sort of almost leathery banding in the leaves that you see in the lower right, when we see that, those symptoms are the result of the nematodes that have been in the bud over the course of the previous winter. Oops. Oh boy. Try again. So this is a map of kind of the way it's spread throughout the US. So 2012, our sort of initial hit over here was in Ohio, along the northern coastline or the coastline there in Ohio. Starts to spread from there down through Pennsylvania, up into New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Moving pretty quickly. As far as we know, it can spread by wind, it can spread through water, it's probably carried on the feet of birds. Even things like microscopic mites, other flying insects can pick these little critters up and carry them. So it's also probably moving in nursery stock, in firewood, in mulch, in soil, and probably even in bits of soil on our boots. Like if I, as a forester, go walk in the woods in Stratford County and then I go somewhere else in the state where beech leaf disease isn't yet, I'm probably taking it there. Unfortunately, with it being a microscopic organism, quarantine is probably not a realistic possibility for controlling this particular organism. So we're likely to see it continue to spread throughout the range of beech, which is all of New England all the way up into Canada. So we found it in 36 new towns in 2025. The good news was it didn't seem to make any large jumps. It's progressively working its way up. We didn't like find it in northern Coas County all of a sudden, but it will be interesting to see what happens this spring when this year's leaves come out. It's probably in other towns that aren't currently mapped. The northernmost town we found it so far is Woodstock. It's probably elsewhere, but just hasn't been detected yet. And there's some hope that maybe there's a little bit of cold limiting going on, that as you get into the White Mountains and you're getting colder winter temperatures, that perhaps that could knock back some of that population, but that sort of remains to be seen. And when you look at that previous slide and you look at how far north it is in Maine, I'm not necessarily as optimistic about that as some of the other folks that I've talked to. Having said that, I should have added this in my introduction. I'm a forester, I'm a forest ecologist. I am not an entomologist. I'm not a pathologist. I'm a generalist. So I know some about a lot of these things, but if you have really specific questions, feel free to ask, but I'll tell you if I can't answer them, but I'll find the right person who can. There's some really smart people working on this organism and all of the other ones, and they spend all of their time on this. So, beech leaf disease. So going back to this slide, this is kind of what it looks like a little bit earlier in the infestation. This light banding where you're starting to see it's very distinctively between the veins in the leaves. And that's happening, that damage is occurring when those nematodes are in the buds over the winter. And then we're seeing it when the leaves come out. So this is kind of what it looks like in the first year or two of infestation. By year, even sometimes year 2 or 3, the leaves are starting to look really beat up. I actually took this picture over on the coast of Maine a couple summers ago, and it had progressed a lot further there. And then by last summer, this is what things were looking like in Stratford County and Stratford and Barrington. And you're driving along the road and you just look into the forest and it looks like the leaves are just kind of like crispy almost. So the leaves come out, they get this leathery, puckered, banded look. And then in some cases, the bud just completely doesn't put out a leaf at all. And then later in the summer, the tree will put out a second flush of leaves. So you get these kind of pale, thin leaves that sort of look like a beech leaf, but they're not quite right for a beech leaf. And you can see that there's no damage to those because they haven't had any nematodes feeding on them, but it's not an effective leaf. If you think about it, the leaves are basically the solar panel of the tree. And that one's not doing a great job, but it's the tree's best effort to kind of hang in there and hang on and do what it can to prolong its survival. We're seeing trees die within about 3 to 6 years from beech leaf disease. So Maine is really starting to see the first wave of sort of larger scale mortality of beech, mostly in the smaller beech. So I know we're talking about what's going on with big trees, but with this particular organism, it starts in our smaller trees, but it is also affecting our bigger beech trees as well. Some of the implications for that. So there's a lot of foresters out there who work more on the production side, timber side. They want to grow high quality, high value trees and make money on them. Beech has not been a popular species for that in New Hampshire for a long time. It's not worth a lot. It doesn't have a lot of commercial use. That is one reason we have so much of it, because in the past, a lot of our forests, when they were cut, were high graded. You take all the good stuff, the oak, the pine, the maple, and you leave behind the beech. Beech also stump sprouts when it is cut. So if you cut beech, it reproduces more. If you don't cut beech, you have more of it. It's very shade tolerant, so you get a lot of it in our maturing forest. And then we have this other thing going on, which is beech bark disease. So we talked about our BLD, now we've got our BBD, and that's on the far right picture over here. Beech bark disease is a combination of a introduced scale insect that was first came over from Europe, introduced in Nova Scotia in about late 1800s, kind of worked its way down south from Nova Scotia into New England. And that little scale insect feeds on the thin bark of the beech tree, and it transmits a fungus, one of 2 or maybe 3 species in the Nectria genus, which is a native fungal organism, and it causes these cankers on beech trees. Nectria is interesting. It also affects other species in different ways. You'll see it as target canker on birch trees. It can canker on maple, but where we really see it is in combination with that scale on beech trees. And that's another thing that causes beech. As the beech bark disease complex stresses out the tree, the beech will put out more sprouts and root sprout. And that's another reason that we have so much sort of small beech all over in the understory of our forest. So we have all these kind of complicated dynamics. We do still have large beech. Beech trees can survive that beech bark disease and sort of hang out in the forest. So we still have some big ones. And where we have them, they're incredibly important as a wildlife species. So picture on the left, if you look in kind of the top right part of that picture, there's a beech nut there, along with those sort of puckered, sad, pathetic leaves that were the second flush leaves from a beech leaf disease infected tree. Those nuts are a hugely important source of food for wildlife, particularly in the northern part of the state where oak is not as prevalent. So down here, this part of the state, acorns, hickory, nuts, those are all great food sources. You get further north, those species drop out, and beech is really the primary source of that hard mast, those hard nuts that get a lot of our critters through the winter, especially bears, but also squirrels and deer and birds and everything else. That picture in the center is a beech tree that has some bear claw marks on it. They will climb up those trees and gather all those beech nuts, and by gram, it's a much more nutritious, higher in fat content, higher in protein than acorns. So it's a great nut. It's pretty tasty, actually. It's a little bit hard to get to, but it's good. So even though some foresters don't love beech, the prospect of losing it in our forest ecosystems is a really big deal, both from an overall biodiversity perspective, a wildlife food source perspective, and also from all of the different things that it supports. And then another factor is we have all this beech out there, particularly the smaller understory beech that's dying as a result of beech leaf disease. And we continue to have these dry summers with intense drought like what we've had. That's generating a lot of stuff that could catch on fire. So that's going to become an increasing concern, I think, with this particular issue as we move forward. There are some options for managing it. They're not great. There is a lot of research being done on this right now, and it's really an evolving situation. We've only had this in our forest for a few years, and New England is really the first place where you had beech leaf disease coming from the Midwest and meeting up with beech bark disease coming down from Canada. And so it's the first time we're getting to see that interplay between those two different pathologies and what happens. Research right now has been focused on, how we can control this. There's not a lot of options out there for nematodes because we haven't dealt with nematodes in a forest setting. So far, the thing that seems to be the most effective is injected thiabendazole. And if I pronounce any of these incorrectly, feel free to correct me because I just read them, so I don't actually know how you're supposed to say them. But thiabendazole is the same. It's the same compound that has been used in the past to treat Dutch elm disease. proactively. It's also used for some fungal diseases in sycamores. So it's traditionally been used as an antifungal for whatever reason. And I don't know that we know the mechanism yet. It does work against beech leaf disease. It's a systemic injectable chemical. So that comes with a set of drawbacks, one of which is that we still, don't necessarily know the full scope of the impacts of putting chemicals into our trees. And there's a lot of folks that would prefer not to do that, and I'm one of them. But when I balance that with the potential to lose an entire species, I think I can justify the use of some of these in specific cases. That said, with this one, it requires drilling, and in this case, you're drilling into the root system of a thin barked tree, which can allow a pathway for other pathogens to get into your tree and cause problems. It's also expensive. It costs about $50 per inch of diameter of a beech tree to treat with thiabendazole. And it's pretty resource intensive. It takes a lot of water. You have to have a pump on site to be pumping it through the system. The injection equipment itself is expensive, so not a lot of tree care companies have it. So all of that put together makes it not very practical to use in a forest setting. It's great if you have a beech tree like this copper beech that I'm standing under at the Elms estate in Newport, which is where a lot of this early work is being done on preventative treatment. But this isn't something that you're going to go out and do in like your woodlot with injections. We also can use some foliar sprays. So fluopyrum is the compound. It's pretty toxic. You're spraying a pretty toxic thing on leaves. So you can't do it near waterways, streams, wetlands, things like that. It's extremely toxic to aquatic organisms. And it works, but only if you can get really good coverage, which means having the equipment to be able to spray high up in a tree, having dry enough weather to do that, hopefully followed by a period of dry weather, but not too much dry weather. So that's complicated there. And then we're also looking at potassium phosphates, which can be applied as a root drench where you're mixing it and just applying it to the soil around the tree or even to the bark at the base of the tree itself. And that's been used as a fertilizer. That's the one thing on this list that, you as a homeowner, landowner can just go buy and do. These others are regulated. You would have to have a licensed pesticide applicator do those for you. You can do it on your own, but again, equipment, access, things like that. But the potassium phosphate is pretty widely used as a fertilizer. And it's fairly benign relative to some of these other things. And it basically works by sort of activating the tree's own defenses. So it's going to kick up its own defenses. Again, we don't quite know why it works, but it seems like it prevents the nematodes from doing as much damage in the buds over the course of the winter. So realistically, we're seeing the best success with treating beech leaf disease is some combination of these. So either the fluopyrum sprays with the potassium phosphates or the root injection with the phosphates. So again, expensive, not easy to necessarily do that on a large scale. So we're also looking in a forested setting at silvicultural possibilities. So things like thinning beech so that they're more widely spaced. Opening up around the canopy so that there's better airflow, more sun, ideally providing more resources for the tree to devote to defense and give it a better chance to fight this off. We don't know. It's only been here a couple years. We could see some natural resistance, but we're not going to know that right away. So it's kind of where we're at with beech leaf disease. There's some cool lookalikes. This is something I get a lot of questions about. I never realized how beat up beech leaves could be until I started looking carefully at them all over the place to see if I could find beech leaf disease. Anthracnose is a sort of general name for a variety of different fungal pathogens that affect our tree leaves. We saw a lot of it this year. It's very prevalent when you have a wet spring like we had. So it just causes these black and brown spots and can cause kind of curling on the edges of leaves. When it's wet and cool around the time of bud break, that's when we see a lot of anthracnose. So this was a big year for it, not just for beech, but for all of our hardwoods. We also have some mites that cause the symptoms that you see in the middle. So they're Aeroneum mites, type of aerophyid mite that produces these velvet patches of galls. They start out kind of light green and yellow, like you see in the picture, and then over the course of the season, they turn brown on beech. It turns out that there are like thousands of these things. I found an old Forest Service guide to aerophyid mites. It's like if you really want to get nerdy about like a very small subset of forest bugs, highly recommend that for some reading, or if you just want to fall asleep, it's a good one. There's some really cool ones. I can show you some other pictures. So you have that, and then we also have some aphids that can cause this banding that looks a lot like beech leaf disease, but it gets that more mottled look. I'm not quite sure how best to describe it, but it's like almost lacy, and it causes the leaves to curl versus like the bands in between the veins to pucker. Most of these, all of these are pretty much just cosmetic unless it's really extensive. So that's beech leaf disease. Any questions on that one? Now that I've just like slammed you with beech leaf disease? Yeah.
You said it originated in Japan, what are they doing?
It doesn't seem to be harmful there, and I think that that is likely because it co-evolved with predator organisms or other factors that like I don't I know that's one kind of component of the research is like why is it not harmful there? And it's likely that if the nematode co-evolved with the trees, there's something about it. There's either like a compound that the trees produce that prevents it from being a problem, or there's predator. I know that's, you know, like if we can figure that out, that's really helpful, right? So, and one thing too, you know, sometimes I hear a lot like there's a reason that so many organisms from Asia are successful as invasive species here, and part of it is that we do have a lot of trade with that area of the world. But the other part is that if you look at Japan's forests, they're very similar to ours. They have very similar climate, similar forest types, similar like species from the same genuses that we have, genera, sorry, that we have in our forests. So it's not just like the trade, it's also that like the organisms there are well suited to do well here. So
So do you think the trees just adapted to it?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, yep. So yeah.
So it's a death sentence to the almond trees?
I mean, as far as we can tell, it seems to be. So I'm hopeful that there will be some trees that survive. And that, you know, one of the things we'll talk about with emerald ash borer is the aftermath forest, and then how that, you know, you have those trees that are potentially resistant, or the trees that have been treated and make it through and kind of repopulate that species. So
Cause I'm in the woods a lot and I noticed this beech thing 2 years ago with the bark and the leaves. But I also noticed some beech trees that are not affected.
yeah. It seems like it's starting with the smaller trees in the understory and then expanding from there. Beech bark disease, we know there's trees that show resistance. We also know there's trees that look like they don't have it, but they do have it. But even just not like it's there, but it's not really harming them. So that's a good thing. So we may have some of that. I think we have to kind of wait and see. And one of the things that I'm glad people aren't doing, people have asked me, like, should I go cut all my beech trees? And my answer is if you are managing your forest land, your woodlot, and you are going to cut beech for something anyway, like firewood, it's a great firewood, feel free, by all means, cut beech, but don't necessarily go out and try to cut all of your beech. You could thin it if you like, that may be helpful. We don't really know, but don't go take the nuclear option and go out and wipe out all your beech, because you're not going to do anything to slow the spread of this. It's everywhere. And you're potentially removing the tree that might be resistant. So yeah.
Is there any way that you treat or clean your shoes or footwear when you're going from forest to forest?
I have not specifically for beech leaf disease, but I do, when I know I'm working in an area that has a lot of invasive species, I might be picking up seeds, things like that. I just have like brushes and stuff at home that I clean my shoes off between like different things, so. Yeah, not specifically for this, but Great. All right, emerald ash borer. So this one folks are probably familiar with, yes? Everyone's heard emerald ash borer, so we won't spend too much time on it, but so you probably know this is a wood boring beetle native to Northeast Asia. Another one that was first detected in the Midwest, right around Detroit in around 2002, made its way east, first seen near Concord in 2013. I think the theory is that it likely came to the Concord area on firewood, probably at the motor speedway, with a lot of campers. These guys, they're a little tiny beetle. If you haven't seen them, I've never actually seen one in real life. They're very small. Really pretty. You could make some cool jewelry out of these. Some people do, actually, out of the elytra. I've never seen a live emerald ash borer. They're pretty elusive. They do fly, that's part of how they spread, but they've modeled the spread of this particular bug based on its flying speed and ability. And long story short, it's very obvious that it didn't only spread by flying. It's been facilitated by people. And this was kind of the bug that really spurred the like, don't move firewood movement, this one and Asian longhorn beetle. Unfortunately, when it comes to emerald ash borer, that ship has sailed. There's no longer federal quarantine on moving ash wood. There are still some state quarantines. Do not take firewood into Maine. They will maybe not arrest you, but you can get a ticket. It won't go over well. Anyway, this bug is now in 37 states plus Washington, DC. It affects all 13 of the ash species that are native to North America. They're starting to see it in Oregon and Idaho, when just a few years ago, I was recommending to some of my clients, like, if you want to increase your hardwood diversity, plant some Oregon ash. And like, maybe not such a good idea. So our species that this affects, we have white, green, and black ash in New England, and it affects all three. We are still seeing new detections of this. So down in this part of the state, it's been around a while, but we're still seeing this spread, particularly up north. So in 2025, Franconia, Bethlehem, Milan, Sugar Hill all got added to the map. Lancaster, Jefferson, Berlin, Randolph, and Gorham in 2024. So it's still up there. It's probably in those towns in between, but just hasn't been seen because the White Mountains make it a little bit harder to survey for it. So up north is like at the forefront of it. Down here, we're still dealing with the effects of it, because this is when our trees are finally really succumbing to emerald ash borer. So on the left is a tree that I saw in Portsmouth, near several houses within striking range, and it has a lot going on with it, but the reason it died was probably emerald ash borer, and now it's splitting and hopefully not falling on someone's house. Dover on the right. One thing about ash is that it does really well in the forest, but it also makes a great street tree, particularly green ash does well in roadside plantings in cities. Dover has a ton of it in their downtown. They elected not to treat it several years ago, and as a result, now a lot of it's going to need to be removed, which is a really big bummer for Dover. What kills the tree with this? So we don't really tend to see the adult beetle. The adult beetles feed on foliage high up in the tree, pretty much just cosmetic damage, but then they crawl inside the bark and lay eggs. Those eggs, as larvae, start to make this S-shaped gallery. You can actually see the gallery get bigger as the larva grows. It's really cool. And then they come out this little tiny D-shaped hole that you can see in the picture on the right. And I also have some examples of that I can pass around. Pretty small. This one has some holes and some larval galleries. So one of the challenges with this particular insect too is that it often, at least in the early stages, nobody knew it was there until it was really obvious. And once it's obvious, that tree is probably not going to respond well to any sort of treatment or management. Some of the more subtle signs, you'll get this like what we call blonding, and that's where woodpeckers have pecked off the ash bark. trying to get to the beetle. People call me a lot and say, hey, this woodpecker is killing my tree. And I'm like, no, it's not. The woodpecker's not killing your tree. The woodpecker's eating whatever might be killing your tree. Or the woodpecker's eating whatever's eating what's killing your tree. So it's not the woodpecker, it's what they're going after. Another sign, and this is sort of a general stress sign for trees, is this epicormic sprouting. So this isn't necessarily indicative of emerald ash borer, and other species do it, but when a tree starts putting out sprouts around the base or lower down on its trunk, it's essentially like when we get hypothermia and all of our blood goes to our core to like try to save us, the tree is essentially just shrinking itself so that it can centralize its resources. So epicormic sprouting is a good stress sign. Blonding, if you can peel back the bark and see the larval galleries on the lower part of the tree, that tree has been infested for a long time. It starts from the top down. Implications. Ash is really important ecologically. Like I said, we have 3 species. They all occupy slightly different ecosystem sites, niches, in functions in our forests. So white ash is found on sort of our rich, moist upland soils, so it likes the richer sites. It's going to be found with things like sugar maple, beech, hemlock, red spruce in that northern hardwood complex. Then we have green ash, which is tolerant of a little bit more water, wet soils found in riparian and low-lying areas. So whereas white ash tends not to be a dominant component in an ecosystem, green ash can be in different ecosystem types. And then black ash is a true wetland species. And in black ash wetlands, it often is the dominant species. And so it's really interconnected with water levels, with nutrient cycling, with all of those different things that are happening. And so when we lose black ash from those sites, that has a huge impact. Another interesting thing to note is I've read some research that ash has, I need to scroll, whoops. Ash has a lot more insects that depend on it. So there's 98 invertebrate species that specialize in feeding on ash foliage in North America. So across those 13 species of ash, we have 98 invertebrates. About a third of those are moths, and a bunch of them are now designated as high risk for extinction because they specialize on ash. And by contrast, from what we know, and I would say it's likely that there's things we don't know because we didn't know they existed, but by contrast, it's thought that only 5 species of invertebrates went extinct as a result of losing chestnut to chestnut blight. So when we think about this, we're not just losing a tree species, we're losing all of the things that might specialize on that tree species. Another interesting little piece of that is that ash bark is less acidic than a lot of other tree bark. So it can support a wider range of lichens and fungal associates. So really cool tree species that also supports a lot of really cool other stuff. And then beyond that, the cultural implications are huge. So ash is a very significant species to every indigenous group that exists across the northern part of the US where ash is found. It's an important material for basket making. It's important to cultural ceremonies. A lot of those black ash swamps are considered native like sacred sites and very important to indigenous culture. And so losing it has implications beyond just our forest ecosystem as well. Yeah.
Several years ago, Worcester, Mass. Cut down all their street trees and part of being wood away. Was that because of emerald?
I think there was some of it for emerald ash borer, but most of it was because Worcester was one of the spots where we had Asian longhorn beetle. So there was a period of time where, and this was coincided with when I pieced out to the West Coast, so I was not as in tune with it. But we were talking a lot about emerald ash borer, and then we were talking a lot about Asian longhorn beetle. Asian longhorn beetle is kind of a success story. It's a big bug. These giant black beetles with white spots. Bad flyers. They can't go very far. They can't go very fast. They're big enough that we can see them easily. But what a bunch of cities in Massachusetts did was they paid a bunch of tree climbers to climb trees and look for these things and look for their exit holes and look for damage and signs of feeding. Asian longhorn beetle affects, it can affect ash, mostly prefers maple, other hardwoods. So they did a massive quarantine that did include a lot of tree removal. But they like Asian longhorn beetle is considered to be successfully controlled and eradicated in New England at this point, which is really cool. But there was definitely also some sanitation of ash where they removed it either preemptively or right after it was impacted. Because it was the hope was that it would prevent spread, which it didn't, unfortunately. So. Some cool things happening with biocontrols here, as well as other mechanisms of control. So we do have some systemic insecticides that work well. They are typically applied, or they're most effective when they're applied as injectables. So similar to that treatment for beech leaf disease, it's a root collar injection, best handled by professional arborist, licensed pesticide applicator. Some of these you can do as a root drench. I think the injection method where it's directly going into the tree and there's very minimal overflow to anywhere else is probably the best bet. They work if they're used preemptively. So ideally starting on trees that have less than 50% canopy dieback. But I'd say even really start with trees that are less than like 25% canopy dieback. Barring that, we're also looking at different biocontrols. So there's some parasitic wasps. The state forest health program has done some controlled release of those. And they are finding some of those biocontrols successfully establishing populations up to 20 miles away from where they were released, which is evidence that they're able to survive, that they're working. And some cool pictures here. So that particular one is on the left. It is a Spathius gallinae cocoons. It's parasitic wasp. On the right is Tetrasticus planapennicii larva. They're feeding on the emerald ash borer larva in their larval galleries and hopefully taking out enough of them that damage to the tree is limited. So the goal here really is to get to a point through both injected insecticide treatment selectively used in pockets of healthy ash around the state, combined with biocontrols to get to a point where we can try to regenerate ash in what we call the aftermath forest. So the idea here is that the population of the beetles peaks when there's a lot for them to eat and feed on. After they've laid their eggs in the tree and you have all those larvae and they turn into adult beetles, if there's no ash left for them to feed on, they're gonna die. They're not gonna make it. So the population crashes. At that point, we're still seeing seedlings and saplings of ash come up in our forests. The beetle doesn't usually attack them until they're large enough. So they have to have that furrowed bark in order for the adults to lay eggs and successfully. So if we can keep regenerating ash in our forest, get enough of those biocontrol species established, and ideally also we're regenerating ash from the trees that have survived the best so far, then we're going to hopefully end up with trees that may have some natural resistance and they will be far enough apart that we can kind of keep prolonging the survival of ash trees indefinitely and until we have like something really solid that can just take out this beetle. So oops. Yeah.
I have just a comment. I have a huge ash tree in my front yard. It's huge. I can't,
Yeah.
so I had the root drench done 2 years ago. I have 3 other ash trees that I had the injectable with they left it there so they could re-inject it. That
Yeah.
was 2 years ago. All of them are healthy, but there are unhealthy ones around them.
Yeah.
Is it something I have to do again?
Yes, thank you. That's a great point. So all of those treatments do need to be repeated, usually every 2 to 3 years. But one of the things that the state forest health program is looking at is on sites where they've done treatment, they're seeing trees like yours that have stayed healthy while others around have succumbed to emerald ash borer. And now they're looking at increasing the interval of treatment and seeing if you can space that out further, let those biocontrols do their thing. And also like with less ash trees, you're getting less pressure from the population of emerald ash borer. So it's one of those things that's probably good to keep doing it, but if they were saying do it every 2 years, now they're looking at every 3 years, maybe you can push it to every 5 years. So, it would be a good thing to have an arborist look at your trees and see if they can find any evidence of new activity and then kind of adjust the treatment schedule from there.
So
So
it's cheap, it was $1,400.
it's not cheap. It's really expensive, which, I think that's a really good argument for ideally the state having programs where they're implementing this at different sites, which they've been doing. And unfortunately, with sort of the way things are with budgets right now, when we're looking at doing similar for beech leaf disease, there's just not as much funding available, there's not as much political will available. They are doing some of it, but not to the same scale. So I think they treated for ash, the state treated I want to say like 93 different sites, multiple trees. And they're going back to them now and they're finding that the trees are doing well. And they're working on spacing out that interval and things like that. The other thing that they've been doing is collecting seeds. So ash is interesting in that it has separate male and female plants. The females only make up about 30% of the ash population, and they don't put out seeds every year. So all of those things combined, it's like you've got to get the right tree, the right year, when it has a good seed year. And ideally you're looking for the ones that are like doing better in a setting where the other ash are dying, because those are the ones that are genetically hopefully gonna help you. So if you have healthy ash trees and you see them putting out seed, we want to know about it because we want to collect them.
They definitely are.
And the state's also planting, they started growing ash seed at the state nursery in 2022. And this past summer, they outplanted that in a variety of sites around the state. So it's the first generation of seed collection and sort of reestablishment, so. Whew, all right. I'm gonna go like 2 minutes and then, cause it's already, we're already almost done here. So this is my last of like sort of the big ones right now. So hemlock woolly adelgid is another one that folks have probably heard about. We'll end on a little bit of good news here because this one has not been as bad as we expected it to be. Hemlock woolly adelgid, and then we'll put a little asterisk there with the elongate hemlock scale because we've got to deal with that one too. Another species that's native to Asia, initially found in New Hampshire and Portsmouth in 2000, expected this to be pretty devastating for hemlock trees, and so far it hasn't been that bad. There were no detections in towns that weren't already on the map last year, which is great. In fact, this map doesn't show any new towns since 2022, so that's even better. And the spread has mostly been limited by cold winter temperatures. So either prolonged cold or intense cold will kill these guys. That said, they have 2 generations a year, so it's just the cold isn't enough to totally knock them out, but it's doing a pretty good job. And if we look at this graph, you can see how percentage of survival over the winter for hemlock woolly adelgids really tracks with our winter minimum temperature. So cold is good. Unfortunately, that means as it continues to get warm, we may see this spread more. Also has some cool biocontrols that have been successfully released and established populations. So we've got 2 beetles, Laricobius beetles, and 2 species of silver flies. And one of the beetle species, Laricobius nigrinus, is pretty well established now in Rockingham County, Stratford County, and Carroll County. So it's out there, it's doing its thing. It is knocking back the population, at least of 1 generation of hemlock woolly adelgid. It hasn't completely solved the problem because the beetles take out the winter generation. The silver flies eat the winter and the summer generation, but they haven't been as successfully established yet. So still working on that. they released a bunch more in the past year, so hopefully they're gonna do their thing. You can also treat hemlock woolly adelgid with some pesticides. Imidacloprid and dinotefuran are the two compounds, and they're typically used as a bark spray. So you're spraying the bark around the base of the tree and it gets absorbed, and it's a good systemic. It'll offer 2 to 3 years of protection. Dinotefuran, more expensive, works for longer, and is also effective against this guy, which is elongate hemlock scale. So another hemlock pest that's native to Japan. First here in 2006, it's a sap feeder, and this one is still expanding. So I think we added several new towns last year. And just for comparison, so hemlock woolly adelgid is on the left, and that feeds, the adelgids feed on the twigs of the hemlock, so you're gonna see them along the twig. On the right is elongate hemlock scale. They feed on the needles themselves. They typically don't look quite as fuzzy, but they can look that fuzzy. So it can be easy, like at first glance, to think woolly adelgid, but if it's on the needles, it's gonna be elongate hemlock scale. They also affect balsam fir, but typically only really in like Christmas tree plantation settings. They can be bad. Control is similar, so they're looking at some parasitoid wasps for biocontrol. They haven't released any here in New Hampshire, but they are finding parasitoid wasps that were released in the mid-Atlantic states, making their way up here, which maybe will offer some help. I think there's a timing mismatch about like when populations of elongate hemlock scale have been high, there haven't been many wasps, and then when there have been a lot of wasps, they gotta get synced up on all that. But it does offer some possibilities, so. All right, it's 2:54, so I'm gonna open it up to questions. I can also just show you more fun pictures if you want. Yeah.
Maybe jumping the gun on this, but I think about how devastating it would be to New England if something were to come along and attack the maple trees. So are there efforts underway to stay ahead of that?
Yeah, so there's, the state has a forest health monitoring program, so a lot of these images, well, the ones that weren't labeled, I took a lot of these, but, a lot of this came from their work, their detection efforts, so we're really paying attention, you know, as we've seen, stuff's usually coming from somewhere else first. I don't think New Hampshire's been like first to have something yet, so hopefully that won't happen. You know, it's tracking all these other diseases. You know, I think the big scare with maple was Asian longhorn beetle. And so it's great that we've got that under control, but it's kind of like, we just don't know yet what we don't know. You know, something that's a relatively benign problem on maples elsewhere could be a huge problem here, and we're not gonna know it till we see it. Some of the things we are looking at, oaks are the other big one. Oaks are extremely important, ecologically, particularly in the southern half of the state. We're looking at oak wilt, which is happening in the Midwest. It's a fungal disease that can be vectored by beetles. So if you have an open wound on the tree, whether that's from pruning or just splitting or whatever, and the beetle lands on it and picks up fungal spores, and then it goes and lands on another oak tree, it can spread it. So there's some pretty advanced detection techniques where they're collecting, I'm not exactly sure what they're collecting, but they've been able to isolate DNA and fungal spores. And so we've seen fungal spores from oak wilt in New Hampshire, but there's no evidence yet that it's establishing itself in our trees. So hopefully it will stay that way. I think as far as what do we do about that? You know, I think really our best bet is to continue to promote diverse, healthy, resilient forests. So healthy individual trees, but like a variety of species, a variety of ages, a variety of sizes, because that way when we do get the next big thing, it's not gonna hopefully take out everything in one, you know, small pocket, so. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, there's a lot of pathogens that seem coming from Asia, Japan, the Northeast, without the other direction.
Yes, I'm not gonna be able to tell you off the top of my head which ones there are, but I know in Europe they're dealing with a few things that they got from us. And I'm gonna have to look it up before I tell you what they are, but, we are exporting our problems or things that aren't a problem here. We have exported that are a problem elsewhere, so.
The longhorn beetle, there are other beetles that look like the longhorn beetle. Did you talk about that a little bit? Because I didn't want to tell everything.
Yeah, definitely. There are some other really cool big beetles. I can pass this around and folks can also come and look at this, but. We have pine sawyer beetles that look similar to Asian longhorn beetles. I can find and pull up a comparison.
But this one has white spots on it. Is that-
Yeah, so it has
It's coming up.
white spots and I think the banding or our native species have like full bands on them on the antenna and the back. I'm gonna have to look, 'cause I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm gonna mess this up. I'm gonna leave it there, but I can show you after if you want. So. Yeah. Yeah,
The systemic insecticides and the biocontrol affect non-target insects.
that's a great question. All of the systemic insecticides have the potential to affect non-target insects. So any other insects that are feeding in or on that tree, I think there is the potential for them to be impacted. It really depends on the mechanism, I think, of how they work for each individual chemical and species. I think that, the injection method is the least likely to have harmful impacts outside the individual tree. I still don't, I personally don't love it. Like, I think you have to make on an individual case, on an individual basis, whether it's an individual tree or a group of trees or, this property versus this property. And it really comes down to sort of balancing the pros and cons of treating versus not treating, so. Yeah,
You have beech for beetles up here, is that an issue?
I don't know it to be an issue, but they probably are here, but probably not, beech or birch.
Birch, I'm sorry.
Yes, we do, we do have bronze birch borer, considered native and I think can be a problem in some cases, but generally not a wide scale, like over big picture threat, so. Yeah, there's so many bugs, I could talk about different bugs forever. Like, I could just cruise, we didn't talk about white pine needle damage, it's a fungal complex, 4 different species, this is another one that, we see a lot of it, it has a delay, so when there's a wet spring, not that year, but the next year, we're likely to see a lot of it, so look for this one next summer, we saw a lot of it last summer. Just causing yellowing and premature needle drop in white pines, which do drop their needles regularly on a 2 to 3 year cycle, but we don't want them to drop early in the summer. They should be, dropping later. So we're likely to see that next year. This is similar, not in a native species, but in a really popular landscape tree, spruce needle cast. So a similar one that is really it happens when you have a wet spring, but you see it the following year. Also, shout out nhbugs.org. This site is maintained by Extension and the State Forest Health Program, in partnership with a variety of agencies across New Hampshire. So this has a lot more information on sort of all of the different pests, pathogens, diseases, particularly the non-natives, but some of the native ones as well. And this is also a great place if you see something to report it. If you're like, what is going on with this bug or symptom on your tree, send in a report at NHBugs. My colleague Doe Bladders, who's our Sullivan County Forester, will take the first look at it. If he doesn't know what it is, he sends it on to Kyle Lombard, Ryan Crandall, and a couple other folks at the State Forest Health Agency. And then from there, we all sort of circulate photos and we're like, ooh, what is that? That's really cool. And figure it out. So, Great. Any other question? I'm happy to stay and chat, but I know folks need to leave. There's also a variety of stuff up here, some mounts of Asian longhorn beetle, some more emerald ash borer stuff that's floating around the room. And they gave me a bunch of, we didn't even talk about spotted lanternflies, which are gross, and hopefully you're all hearing about these because the goal here is for people to know what to look for and get rid of them. If you spend any time in the Mid-Atlantic, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they're not proving to be as devastating to the plants as we thought, but they're really gross and big and they like swarm around your head and like nasty, so, yeah.
My question was on the lanyard.